They looked at that empty place and believed the story was already over. A mother elephant had disappeared overnight, the herd moved on, and only a baby remained, standing alone in the clearing. To most people, it was nature's rule. The weak fall behind, the rest must keep going. But the baby refused to accept it. He didn't chase the herd, he didn't panic, he didn't leave. He stayed because somewhere inside him he believed that the moment he walked away, his mother would truly be gone, and that refusal would soon prove everyone wrong. Dawn came up pale and cautious over Red Plains Reserve, the kind of morning that usually carried comfort, cool air, soft light, the faint rustle of grass that meant the herd was close. But that morning the clearing felt wrong, as if the land itself had forgotten how to breathe. Noah stood in the middle of it, small for an elephant calf, but not small enough to disappear. His ears were too big for his head, his knees still too loose, his skin still holding the gentle folds of infancy. He turned in a slow circle, searching with a seriousness that didn't belong on a young face. The scent of the herd was everywhere, warm bodies, crushed stems, the lingering musk of safety. Yet the sound of them was gone. No low rumbles, no steady footfalls, no calm presence brushing against his flank. He took a few steps forward, then stopped hard. The ground ahead was torn up, like it had been plowed in a hurry. Grass lay flattened in a crude oval, mud pressed deep where a heavy body had fought for traction. There were drag marks, too, dark lines scored into the damp soil running toward the eastern edge of the clearing before dissolving into the taller reeds. The tracks of many elephants overlapped and tangled there, a confusion of prints that made it hard to tell what had happened, but the message in the dirt was plain enough. Something had gone wrong, and the herd had moved on without finishing the story. Noah lowered his head and reached his trunk toward the churned earth. He inhaled, slow and focused, like someone reading a letter written in a language only he understood. Then he lifted his trunk and let out a short call, thin, desperate, and too young to carry far. Nothing answered. He called again, longer this time, the sound catching in his throat at the end. He took a step toward the drag marks, then another. Halfway there, he stopped, as if an invisible hand had closed around his ribs. He swung his head left and right, ears open wide, listening for a familiar rumble. Willow's voice, felt more than heard, the steady vibration that used to rise through Noah's bones when he pressed close to her side. Willow was the mother, the anchor, the one who guided him around thorn trees and down safe paths to water. The last memory Noah carried was of her walking beside him in the dusk, her flank warm against his shoulder, her trunk occasionally brushing his back like a quiet reassurance. The reserve had been peaceful then. The sky had been streaked with orange. The herd had smelled calm. Now there was only silence and torn ground. Noah tried to follow the herd's tracks. He walked several yards toward the west, where the prints were clean and purposeful, the direction the rest of them had taken. He paused, looked back, and froze. The drag marks pulled at him like a rope. His feet shifted in the dirt, uncertain. For a heartbeat, he seemed ready to run after the others, to choose the living path that every instinct should have chosen. Instead, he turned around and came back. He returned to the exact spot where the ground was most disturbed, as if this was the place where the world had split in two. He stood there, chest rising and falling, trunk hanging low, and he began to rock gently forward and back. Each time his weight moved, his feet pressed deeper into the mud. It looked like stubbornness to anyone watching, but it wasn't stubbornness, it was refusal. Pure, raw, and absolute. From the dirt road on the far side of the clearing, a safari vehicle rolled to a stop. The engine cut. A couple stepped down carefully, older tourists with sun hats and practical shoes, their faces lined in the way of people who had lived through enough to recognize grief even in an animal. The man lifted binoculars. The woman raised a phone. They didn't speak at first. They just watched. Noah called again, a wavering sound that made the woman's mouth tighten. She put a hand on her husband's arm as if to steady herself. The husband said something low, maybe a prayer, maybe a simple comment, the kind older folks make when they don't want to alarm anyone, but can't pretend they aren't seeing what they're seeing. The woman began recording. In the quiet of the morning, the phone's little red dot captured a calf standing alone where no calf should ever be alone. It captured the way Noah's ears searched the air like radar dishes. It captured the empty space where a mother should have been. And it captured Noah's choice, the part that made no sense to most people. He did not run after the herd. He did not wander randomly. He stayed. The video was shaky at first, then it steadied, as if the woman understood that what she was filming wasn't wildlife entertainment. It was a moment that might follow her home, sit with her at dinner, keep her awake later when the lights were out and the quiet had weight. She whispered, "Where's his mom?" Not as a question for the world, but as a plea. Noah shifted again and pawed at the ground, scraping mud aside with his front foot as though he could dig willow back out of it. He pressed his trunk to the earth and inhaled once more. Then he made a sound that was softer than a call, more like a broken sigh, before lifting his head and staring toward the reeds where the drag marks vanished. The tourists didn't know what to do. They weren't veterinarians. They weren't rangers. They were just people who paid for a trip they'd saved for, maybe after years of careful budgeting and financial planning, thinking it would be a calm, beautiful experience. They'd probably talked about retirement, about life insurance and Medicare options back home, the things that matter when you're older and trying to protect the years you have left. None of that prepared them for a baby elephant refusing to accept an empty world. The man finally spoke, voice tight. "We should tell the rangers." He climbed back into the vehicle to radio the lodge while the woman kept filming, tears threatening, but not falling. A few minutes later, a guide's voice crackled through the radio, and then another. Words passed that weren't meant for Noah's ears. Coordinates, descriptions, urgency. The woman sent the clip to someone at the lodge. Then, because people are people, it spread. A guide forwarded it to a ranger friend. A ranger friend forwarded it to a group chat. Someone added a caption they thought was accurate because certainty travels faster than questions. Mother elephant lost overnight. Calf left behind. By late morning, the video had a life of its own, bouncing across screens with comments that ranged from sorrow to certainty to cold speculation. Some said predators must have taken her. Others insisted it was poachers. A few declared, with the bluntness of strangers who don't pay the cost of their words, that the mother was gone and nature would do the rest. But in the clearing, Noah hadn't read any captions. He hadn't made peace with any theories. He stood in the mud as the sun climbed higher, and he waited as if waiting could rewrite what the world was trying to tell him. Every so often he called, and every time the sound came out a little weaker, not because his hope was dying, but because his body was running out of the strength required to refuse reality. When the first distant rumble of a vehicle finally reached the clearing, fast, purposeful, coming from the Reserve's ranger station, Noah didn't run. He didn't hide. He only turned his head slightly, then looked back to the drag marks as if to say, to anyone arriving, "You're late? She's not here. And I'm not leaving?" And somewhere behind the approaching engine noise, the silence held its breath. The first ranger truck arrived in a cloud of dust that felt far too loud for a place so still. Noah flinched at the sound but didn't move away. He shifted his weight, feet sinking deeper into the mud, and watched the vehicle with dark, steady eyes that held neither fear nor curiosity, only calculation. He was measuring distance, not threat. Ethan stepped out first. He was young for a senior ranger assignment, lean from long days in the field, his uniform already stained with red soil that never quite washed out. Behind him came Rosa, older, broader, her movements economical in the way of someone who had learned not to waste energy on surprises. They both stopped when they saw Noah, standing alone in the clearing. Neither spoke right away. Rosa scanned the ground, reading the story written there with the practiced calm of experience. Flattened grass, broken stems, the deep grooves that told of weight, dragged, not walked. She followed the marks with her eyes toward the reeds, then out to the west where the herd's tracks pulled away in a clean, determined line. "They left," she said quietly, not as a judgment, as a fact. Ethan nodded, but his attention kept drifting back to Noah. The calf hadn't moved from the center of the disturbance. He stood exactly where the ground was most torn, as if that spot mattered more than any other place in the world. "No sign of her beyond that," Rosa continued. "No return tracks. No doubling back." Ethan crouched and touched the soil near the drag marks. It was dry on top, damp underneath, old enough to have cooled. Too old for hope, if you were being practical. The safari vehicle was still parked at the edge of the clearing. The older couple stood a few yards back, uncertain, respectful. The woman lowered her phone when she saw the rangers arrive, relief and guilt crossing her face at the same time. Rosa walked over to them. "Thank you for calling it in," she said, her voice steady and kind. "We'll take it from here." The woman hesitated. Is the mother—" Rosa didn't answer right away. She looked back at the clearing, at Noah, at the direction the herd had taken. She chose her words carefully, the way people do when they've had to explain loss more times than they can count. "It doesn't look good," she said. Those words moved fast, faster than the trucks, faster than the people on the ground. By the time Rosa turned back to Ethan, the phrase had already taken on a life of its own. "Doesn't look good." Ethan radioed the station with a brief report. Coordinates: 1 calf, evidence of struggle, possible loss of adult female. The response came back clipped and professional, the language of procedure and risk assessment. Predators were active in the area. Weather could turn by afternoon. The priority was clear: secure the calf. Noah let out another call, sharper this time. He took a step toward the reeds and stopped. His ears angled east, catching something that wasn't sound so much as vibration, the faintest suggestion of movement carried through the ground. Ethan saw it. The way Noah froze. The way his entire body leaned in one direction, as if listening with more than his ears. Rosa followed Ethan's gaze. "He's stressed," she said. "Confused." "Or focused," Ethan replied before he could stop himself. Rosa looked at him, measuring. "Don't project," she said gently. "Calves don't make good decisions under stress." Before Ethan could answer, a distant sound rolled across the clearing. Low, rough, not close enough to identify, but close enough to change the temperature of the moment. A lion. The tourists stiffened. The woman took a step back without thinking. Rosa's jaw tightened. "That's our clock," she said. "We can't leave him out here." She motioned to 2 more rangers who had arrived behind them. "We guide him west," she said, back toward the herd's path, slow and calm. They approached carefully, spreading out to create a gentle barrier. Rosa extended her arm, palm low, voice soft. "Easy, big guy," she murmured, knowing the words didn't matter as much as the tone. Noah reacted instantly. He backed away from them, not panicked, but deliberate. He swung his head, trunk lifting in a warning that surprised everyone. Then he pivoted and moved, straight back to the churned earth. He planted himself there, legs stiff, head lowered. Ethan felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "He's guarding it," Ethan said quietly. "Guarding what?" one of the younger rangers asked. Ethan didn't answer. He watched Noah scrape the ground with his foot again, pushing mud aside as if searching for something beneath it. Or someone. Rosa exhaled slowly. "This is attachment behavior," she said. "He's locked onto the last place he remembers her. It doesn't mean she's alive." The words sounded rehearsed, the kind of language professionals use to protect themselves from hope. Ethan knew that language. He'd used it himself in other contexts, when talking to visitors about safety, about conservation funding, about long-term planning for the reserve. It was the same tone people back home used when discussing health insurance options or retirement planning. Realistic, cautious, designed to manage expectations. But Noah didn't speak that language. He turned his head again toward the reeds, ears wide, his trunk lifted, tasting the air. For a moment, the clearing seemed to tilt toward him, as if waiting to see what he would do. Another sound carried across the grass. Closer now, a low, impatient growl. Rosa straightened. "That's it," she said. "We move him now." The team advanced together, closing the distance. One ranger fired a warning shot into the air, not toward Noah, but away from him, meant to startle without harm. The crack echoed, sharp and final. Noah startled, trumpeting once in alarm. He stumbled back, then froze. His eyes flicked between the humans and the drag marks. His body trembled, torn between instincts that demanded opposite things. For one terrible second, Ethan thought he might bolt blindly into danger. Instead, Noah did something else. He lowered his head and let out a long, sustained call, deeper than any sound he'd made so far. It wasn't a cry of panic, it was a message. A signal carried through air and ground alike, the kind meant for one receiver only. The call faded. The clearing fell quiet again. Nothing answered. Rosa closed her eyes for a brief moment, then opened them with resolve. "He's calling a ghost," she said softly. "And if we don't act, he'll be dead by nightfall." Ethan didn't argue out loud, but as the team prepared to push forward again, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of a mistake, one that would be explained later in reports and meetings, weighed against safety protocols and liability concerns, the way difficult choices always are. Some decisions, he knew, followed logic. Others followed something older. And Noah, standing his ground in the torn earth, was very clearly following the latter. The standoff stretched longer than anyone expected. Noah did not charge. He did not flee. He stood exactly where he had chosen, legs braced, head lowered, ears angled outward like open doors. The warning shot had rattled him, but it hadn't broken his resolve. If anything, it had sharpened it. The calf's breathing slowed, his movements grew deliberate, and his attention fixed on the space beyond the reeds, as though the rest of the world had dimmed. Rosa gave a subtle hand signal, and the rangers paused. Dust settled. Even the tourists, now guided farther back for safety, seemed to sense that noise would only make things worse. "This isn't panic anymore," Ethan said under his breath. Rosa watched Noah carefully. "No," she agreed. "It's fixation." From the edge of the clearing, a large female elephant appeared, one of the matriarch's sisters, tall and scarred, her presence commanding without effort. She approached slowly, emitting a low, steady rumble meant to soothe. This was the herd's answer to chaos: experience, authority, calm. The female reached Noah and extended her trunk, brushing his shoulder with a gentleness that spoke of shared blood and shared history. For a moment, it looked like it might work. Noah leaned toward her, resting his head briefly against her leg. Ethan held his breath. Then Noah pulled away. He turned back toward the disturbed ground, stepping directly between the older female and the drag marks. His body became a barrier. He lifted his trunk, not in aggression, but in refusal, and let out a short, firm sound that carried more certainty than fear. The female froze. She studied him, her dark eyes thoughtful. Then, slowly, she backed away. A ripple moved through the onlookers. Even Rosa looked unsettled. "He's blocking her," one ranger whispered. "I've never seen that." At that moment, a white utility vehicle pulled up on the dirt road, its logo marked with the emblem of a wildlife research foundation. A woman stepped out, tall and composed, her hair pulled back, her posture relaxed, but alert. Maya. She didn't rush forward. She didn't speak right away. She stood still and watched Noah with the focus of someone trained to notice what others dismiss. "This isn't confusion," she said finally. "It's orientation." Rosa turned. "Explain." Maya gestured toward Noah's ears. "See how they keep angling east? He's not reacting randomly. He's tracking something, vibrations, scent, possibly both." Rosa crossed her arms. "Or he's locked onto the last place he saw his mother." "That too," Maya said. "But those things aren't mutually exclusive." Ethan felt a quiet surge of relief. Someone else saw it. The lion's presence lingered at the edge of the day, unseen but felt. The pressure to act hung over them all, heavy and practical. Safety protocols existed for a reason. Liability existed for a reason. Back at headquarters, decisions would be justified in reports that sounded a lot like the language people used when discussing long-term care insurance or estate planning: measured, cautious, designed to minimize risk. But no policy had prepared them for a calf who refused to cooperate. Noah dropped to his knees without warning, the sound of his weight hitting the mud, dull and final. He pressed his forehead to the ground, trunk curled inward, and went still. The clearing seemed to shrink. Maya inhaled sharply. "He's grounding," she said. "Listening through the earth." Rosa stared at the calf. Years of experience told her what she should do. Years of experience also told her that sometimes the most dangerous mistakes came from assuming you already understood the situation. Ethan knelt beside her. "If she's alive," he said quietly, "and we pull him away now." Rosa finished the thought for him. "She won't be able to find him." Silence settled again, broken only by the distant buzz of insects and the hum of a vehicle idling too long. The tourists watched from afar, faces pale, the woman clutching her phone without recording. This wasn't a moment for footage. It was a moment that felt personal, like a family decision being made in public. Maya stepped closer to Noah, careful not to cross his invisible boundary. "He's telling us something," she said. "We just don't know yet if we're willing to hear it." Rosa closed her eyes briefly. In her mind flashed images of incident reports, budget meetings, donor calls, conversations about funding conservation efforts, about balancing public safety with preservation. The same conversations people had late in life when they sat down with a financial advisor, weighing risks against what they couldn't afford to lose. She opened her eyes. 10 minutes, Rosa said. "We observe. No pushing. No forcing." Ethan let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Noah remained still, forehead pressed to the earth as if anchoring himself to something unseen. The world waited with him, and somewhere beyond the reeds, unseen and unheard by everyone but the calf, something shifted. The sky changed without warning. One moment, it was a washed-out blue, thin clouds drifting lazily above the clearing. The next, the light dimmed, as if someone had drawn a curtain across the sun. A low roll of thunder followed, distant but deliberate, the kind that didn't ask permission. Rosa looked up first. "That wasn't on the forecast," she said. Maya checked her tablet, refreshing the satellite feed with a frown. "It wasn't supposed to hit this area until tonight." The wind arrived before the rain, pushing through the grass in heavy waves. Dust lifted, then dropped again as the air thickened. Noah raised his head from the ground, ears flaring wide. He didn't retreat. He turned east. The first drops fell large and spaced out, darkening the soil where they landed. Within minutes, the rain intensified, hammering the clearing with a force that flattened grass and blurred the sharp edges of footprints. The drag marks, so clear that morning, began to soften, their meaning dissolving under the weight of water. "Evidence is going to be gone," Ethan said. Rosa knew it. Every instinct in her body screamed that this was the turning point. Rain didn't just erase tracks, it erased options. "All right," she said, raising her voice over the wind. "We're not waiting this out. We move him now." Before anyone could respond, a flash of lightning split the sky, followed by a crack of thunder so loud it vibrated in the chest. Noah startled violently. He spun, slipped in the forming mud, and went down hard on one knee. Ethan lunged forward instinctively. "Easy, easy." But Noah was already scrambling back up, panic flaring for the first time. The rain plastered his skin dark, ran in streams along his legs. He trumpeted sharply, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the storm. Then he ran. Not west, not toward the herd. East, straight toward the reeds. "Noah!" Ethan shouted, even though the name meant nothing to the calf. The rangers surged forward, boots slipping in the mud. Rosa barked orders into the radio, calling for backup, for vehicles to reposition, for anyone who could cut off the eastern edge before the terrain turned worse. The tourists were ushered back to their vehicle, the woman clutching her phone to her chest now, not filming, her face pale. This wasn't a moment to document. It was a moment to survive. Noah crashed through the reeds with a reckless urgency that bordered on desperation. The ground there dipped, hidden beneath tall grass that masked shallow channels carved by seasonal water. Each step splashed, mud sucking at his feet like hands trying to pull him under. Ethan chased after him, heart pounding, aware of the limits of his own body. He slipped once, caught himself, and kept going. Behind him, Rosa split the team, half following on foot, half circling with vehicles in hopes of intercepting ahead. The rain intensified, turning from sheets to curtains. Visibility dropped to yards. "Noah!" Ethan called again, his voice raw. The calf slowed near the edge of a low-lying basin, water already pooling there. He hesitated, swinging his head, ears flicking wildly. For a moment, it looked like he might turn back. Then he stopped dead. He lifted his trunk, angled his head, and went still. Ethan skidded to a halt a few yards behind him, breath burning in his chest. He followed Noah's gaze into the gray blur of rain and reeds. He couldn't see anything. He couldn't hear anything beyond the storm. But Noah could. The calf took one cautious step forward, then another, as if drawn by a thread only he could feel. His panic eased, replaced by a focused urgency that was somehow calmer than before. Ethan's radio crackled. "We're losing signal," Rosa's voice cut in and out. "Ground's flooding. Pull back if—" The transmission dissolved into static. Ethan made a decision he would later have to justify in meetings and reports, in conversations that would reference safety budgets, risk management, and liability concerns, the same language people used when talking about comprehensive insurance coverage or Medicare planning, weighing what protection cost against what it saved. He followed Noah. The basin gave way underfoot, mud swallowing Ethan's boots halfway to the ankle. Water rushed in from the sides, carrying debris, leaves, and the last remaining traces of tracks. Whatever story the ground had held that morning was gone now, washed clean by the storm. Ahead, Noah slipped again, catching himself just in time. He let out a low sound, not fear, not pain, but something strained and urgent. Ethan's stomach dropped. "Noah, wait," he said softly, useless words carried off by rain. Another flash of lightning illuminated the basin for a split second. In that instant, Ethan saw something that made his blood run cold, a length of old wire half buried near the edge of the water, twisted and dark with age. Not fresh, not set recently, but real. A snare. Before he could react, Noah surged forward, disappearing into the gray curtain of rain beyond the basin. "Rosa," Ethan shouted into his radio, "I think there's—" Static. The storm swallowed the clearing behind them, swallowing certainty along with it. Whatever conclusions had been drawn, that morning, whatever anyone thought they knew about what had happened to Willow, were being erased, one muddy wave at a time. And somewhere ahead, in the rising water and the relentless rain, Noah was no longer refusing. He was searching. Darkness fell faster than anyone expected. The storm dragged the sun down with it, turning afternoon into evening in a matter of minutes. Rain continued to pound the basin, filling every low place with water that had nowhere to go. The reeds bent and whispered under the weight of it, and the air grew heavy with the smell of wet earth and decay. Noah slowed as the ground beneath him softened further. Each step sank deeper, mud pulling at his legs with quiet insistence. He tried to lift his front foot and nearly lost his balance, letting out a sharp, breathless sound before steadying himself. His sides heaved. The wild certainty that had driven him forward was being tested now, replaced by exhaustion that crept into his joints and dulled his movements. Ethan caught up just in time to see Noah stumble again. "Easy, buddy," he murmured, more to himself than to the calf. His boots were soaked through, his legs burning from the effort of moving through mud that seemed determined to keep him. He scanned the darkness, every sense stretched thin. The storm masked too much. Sounds overlapped, rain, wind, distant thunder, leaving him unsure what was real and what his mind filled in. Noah stopped near the center of the basin. Water pooled around his feet, rising slowly but steadily. The calf shifted his weight, testing the ground, then froze. His ears angled forward, his trunk lifting slightly. The frantic edge he'd carried earlier dulled, replaced by something quieter and more troubling. He was listening again. Ethan followed Noah's gaze into the darkness. He couldn't see more than a few yards ahead. He strained to hear past the rain, past his own breathing. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then, faint and irregular, came a sound that didn't belong to the storm. A low vibration, not loud, not clear, but real. Ethan's pulse spiked. "Did you hear that?" he whispered into the empty air. Noah answered with a soft, broken rumble of his own. It wasn't a full call, more like a response shaped by fatigue. His knees trembled as he took another step forward. The ground gave way. Noah's front legs plunged into a deeper pocket of mud, sucking him down to the chest in an instant. He trumpeted sharply, panic flashing back to the surface. He tried to pull free, but every movement dragged him deeper, the mud clinging with a strength that felt alive. Ethan ran to him, slipping once, then dropping to his knees beside the calf. All right, he said, heart pounding. He grabbed Noah's shoulder, braced his own body against the pull of the mud, and pushed upward with everything he had. Noah fought too hard. "Stop," Ethan gasped, realizing the struggle was making it worse. Stop. Just for a second. As if sensing the shift, Noah paused. His breathing came in harsh bursts, his trunk curling inward protectively. Ethan seized the moment, shoving mud away from Noah's legs, widening the space just enough to give him leverage. Together, human and calf, they worked free inch by inch. When Noah finally lurched back onto firmer ground, he sagged, nearly collapsing. Ethan stayed with him, one hand pressed to the calf's side, feeling the rapid thud of his heart. The rain eased slightly, thinning to a steady drizzle. In the brief lull, sound carried farther. This time, there was no mistaking it. A long, strained call echoed from deeper in the basin. Weak, broken, but unmistakably elephant. Noah's head snapped up. He answered instantly, the sound tearing from him despite his exhaustion. He took a step forward, then another, his body shaking with the effort. Ethan's throat tightened. "She's alive," he whispered, though no one was there to hear him. His radio crackled, faintly, a broken voice cutting through static. "Ethan, do you copy?" "Rosa," he said urgently. "I hear her. She's alive. East Basin." Static swallowed the rest. The night pressed in around them, thick and unforgiving. Ethan knew what else moved under cover of darkness, what listened when elephants called in distress. Somewhere beyond the reeds, predators waited, patient and opportunistic. Every minute here increased the risk, for Noah and for him. Noah seemed to sense it too. His movement slowed, his energy fading fast. He stood with his legs spread for balance, head lowered, sides quivering with fatigue. The call he answered now was weaker, thinner, like a promise he was struggling to keep. Ethan looked around, calculating distances he couldn't see, risks he couldn't fully measure. Back at the station, this night would later be dissected in careful language. Decisions weighed against safety protocols, costs tallied, risks assessed, the way people back. Home discussed long-term care, disability coverage, or emergency savings. Logical conversations meant to make sense of things after the fact. Out here, logic felt fragile. Noah took another step and nearly collapsed. Ethan moved in front of him instinctively, standing between the calf and the dark. "We're not done," he said softly. "Not yet." Noah leaned into him, just slightly, the weight of trust settling heavy and sudden. His breathing slowed, though it remained labored. He lifted his trunk once more and released a final trembling call into the night. Somewhere ahead, faint but persistent, an answer came back. The longest night wasn't over. The rain finally loosened its grip, thinning to a mist that hung in the air like breath on cold glass. The basin lay half-submerged, a patchwork of dark water and slick mud that reflected the faint glow of the sky. Sound traveled differently now, clearer, sharper, each movement carrying farther than it had moments before. Ethan steadied Noah with a hand at his shoulder. The calf swayed, then found his balance, legs trembling but locked. His ears angled forward again, unwavering, and he took a careful step toward the sound that had answered him. It came once more, faint but unmistakable, from deeper within the basin, closer than before. Ethan followed the direction of the call with his eyes and finally saw what he hadn't wanted to see. Near the edge of a low rise, half hidden by reeds and mud, lay a length of old wire tangled in brush. It was rusted, twisted, and cruelly simple. A snare. Not new, not set with care. The kind left behind and forgotten, until it wasn't. His chest tightened. If Willow had passed through here in the storm, injured or panicked, it would have been enough. Enough to pull her down. Enough to slow her until exhaustion did the rest. The radio crackled again, this time clearer. "Ethan, hold position," Rosa's voice said. "We're regrouping. Ground teams are moving east. Visibility is improving." "I hear her," Ethan replied, forcing calm into his voice. "She's alive, but there's a snare near the basin edge. Old wire." There was a pause on the line, long enough for Ethan to imagine Rosa's face, the calculations running behind her eyes, risk to personnel, risk to the calf, the thin margin between rescue and disaster. The kinds of calculations people made later in life when they sat with a financial advisor weighing long-term care insurance against what they hoped they'd never need. Practical, necessary, heavy. "Proceed with caution," Rosa said at last. "Do not engage unless you can confirm her position." Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at Noah. The calf had already moved past him, careful now, each step deliberate. He wasn't charging anymore. He wasn't panicking. He was navigating. The ground ahead sloped gently upward, offering firmer footing. Noah climbed it with effort, pausing often, his breath shallow and fast. At the top, the land dipped again into a shallow hollow. There she was. Willow lay on her side in the mud, chest rising and falling in short, uneven bursts. One foreleg was bent at an unnatural angle, skin torn where wire had bitten deep and held fast. Her eyes were open, dulled by exhaustion, but alert enough to lock onto Noah the moment he stepped into view. She rumbled, a sound so weak it barely carried. Noah answered, a broken, trembling call that collapsed into a sigh as he reached her side. He pressed his head against her shoulder, trunk curling around her leg as if trying to hold her together by force alone. Ethan swallowed hard. He dropped to his knees a few yards away, hands shaking as he keyed the radio. "Rosa," he said, "I have visual. She's alive. Injured. Snare involved." The response came quickly now, urgency replacing restraint. "We're moving. ETA 10 minutes. Keep predators off if you can." 10 minutes might as well have been an hour. The night shifted around them, alive with unseen movement. Somewhere to the north, a low growl carried on the damp air. Willow lifted her head weakly, ears twitching, and tried to pull her injured leg beneath her. The effort cost her. She sagged back into the mud with a sound that cut through Ethan's chest. Noah reacted instantly, stepping between her and the darkness, his small body squared and determined. He lifted his trunk and trumpeted, not loud but sharp enough to send a message. Ethan rose slowly, scanning the perimeter, his pulse hammering. He had no weapon ready, no backup at his side, only a flare clipped to his belt and the knowledge that sometimes presence itself could buy time. He lit the flare and held it high. Red light bloomed, harsh and unnatural, throwing shadows across the reeds. The growl faded, replaced by retreating movement. For now. Willow watched him with a gaze that was both wary and grateful. She shifted again, trying to free her leg. Ethan moved closer, careful, speaking softly. "Easy," he murmured. "Help is coming." He examined the wire quickly. It was embedded deep, the metal biting into flesh, swollen from hours of strain. Removing it without tools would be dangerous, possibly fatal. He stopped himself from trying. This wasn't about heroics. It was about timing. The radio crackled again, voices now, footsteps splashing through shallow water, lights cutting through the mist. Rosa arrived first, face set and focused. She took in the scene in one glance, Willow's injury, Noah's position, the surrounding darkness, and nodded once. "You were right," she said quietly. "We were wrong." Maya appeared beside her, breathless, eyes shining with a mix of relief and dread. "He never stopped listening," she said, looking at Noah. "That's why he stayed." The team moved quickly but carefully, setting lights, forming a perimeter, preparing equipment. Willow rumbled weakly as hands approached, as unfamiliar scents filled the air. Noah stayed pressed against her, refusing to move until Rosa gently guided him just far enough away to keep him safe. Ethan stepped back, muscles aching, heart still racing. He knew that later, this night would be broken down into bullet points and budgets, into discussions about conservation funding and equipment upgrades, into the kind of administrative language that sounded a lot like retirement planning or Medicare coverage. How to be better prepared next time. But standing there in the red glow of flares and headlights, watching a calf who refused to accept loss and a mother who had survived because of it, those conversations felt far away. For now, there was only this, a track no one wanted to follow, and the cost of turning away. The basin no longer felt empty. Light from the ranger vehicles cut through the mist in pale, steady beams, turning rain-soaked reeds into silver threads. Shadows moved where people worked, careful and controlled, voices low and purposeful. The chaos of the night condensed into a narrow circle around Willow and Noah, as if the world had decided, for the moment, to focus on only 2 lives. Willow tried again to rise. The effort was instinctive, automatic, the response of a mother who sensed danger too close to her calf. Her injured leg buckled the instant she shifted her weight, and she collapsed back into the mud with a breathless groan that made several people flinch. "No, no," Maya said softly, kneeling beside her. "Don't fight it." Noah reacted before anyone else could. He stepped in tight against Willow's shoulder, pressing his small body into her side as if to prop her up by sheer will. His trunk wrapped around her leg again, gentle but firm, his forehead resting against her chest. He made a low, continuous sound, not loud enough to carry far, but steady, an anchor. Ethan felt his throat close. This wasn't a reunion meant for witnesses. It was raw and quiet and edged with fear. There was no triumphant, trumpeting, no burst of relief, just contact, just confirmation. "She's still in shock," Rosa said, crouching near Willow's head. Her voice was calm, but her eyes kept flicking to the dark beyond the lights. "We don't have much margin here." As if summoned by the words, a ripple moved through the grass at the edge of the perimeter. Not close enough to see clearly, close enough to know. The predators hadn't left. They were waiting. Rosa straightened. "Flares up," she ordered. "Wider circle." Red light flared again, harsh and unnatural against the night. The shadows retreated, then lingered just beyond the glow. A low growl rolled through the reeds, answered by nothing. The standoff shifted, tense and fragile. Ethan moved to Willow's injured leg, careful to stay in her line of sight. The wire was worse than he'd thought, bitten deep, skin swollen and torn. Removing it here would risk bleeding they couldn't control. Leaving it too long risked infection that could end everything slowly. "We stabilize," Rosa said. "We move her at first light." Maya hesitated. "She won't make it far like this." Rosa nodded once. "I know." Noah lifted his head, ears wide, as if he understood the weight of the moment. He didn't move away when Rosa gently guided him a step back, didn't resist when Maya placed herself between him and the injured leg. He stayed close enough to touch, close enough to remind Willow she wasn't alone. The night stretched. Minutes felt like hours. The rain eased into a fine mist, leaving the air cold and heavy. Ethan stood watch, muscles aching, senses tuned to every sound. His thoughts drifted, uninvited, to conversations far removed from this place. Meetings about funding, about donor support, about sustainable conservation strategies. The kinds of conversations that also happened in living rooms back home, when older couples talked through retirement plans, health care coverage, or long-term care insurance, trying to prepare for futures they couldn't fully imagine. Preparation mattered, but it never covered everything. A sudden movement near the perimeter snapped him back. A shape lunged into the light, then recoiled as another flare went up. The predators tested the boundary, probing for weakness. They smelled blood. They heard labored breathing. They knew opportunity when it lingered too long. Willow rumbled weakly, her trunk lifting and falling. Noah answered instantly, stepping forward again despite Rosa's outstretched hand. "Let him," Maya said quietly. "She needs him." Noah pressed his head against Willow's chest once more. His small body shook with fatigue, but he held the contact, grounding her. Willow's breathing slowed just slightly, enough to matter. Then it happened. From somewhere beyond the lights, farther than the predators, deeper than the basin, a sound rose. Low, full, unmistakable. The herd. It wasn't a single call. It was a layered vibration, many. Voices braided together, rolling across the land like a distant tide. The sound cut through the night, through the tension, through every assumption that had been made since morning. Noah froze. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Noah lifted his head and answered with everything he had left. His call was thin but true, a thread thrown into the dark. The response came again, closer this time. Rosa's breath caught. "They're coming back," she said. Maya shook her head slowly, awe and disbelief mixing in her expression. They never left completely. They were waiting. Waiting. The words settled over Ethan like a weight. The herd had not abandoned Willow. They had moved to safety, trusting something older than certainty. Trusting that if she could, she would find her way back. Trusting the signal that mattered most. Noah. The predators melted away as the distant vibrations grew stronger. They knew better than to challenge a returning herd. The perimeter held, then became unnecessary. Willow shifted again, lifting her head higher this time. Her eyes, dull with pain and exhaustion, sharpened just enough to track the direction of the sound. She rumbled back, a weak but deliberate reply. Noah leaned into her, exhausted beyond words, and for the first time since dawn, he stopped calling. He didn't need to anymore. The sound that changed everything had already done its work. Morning arrived quietly, as if the land itself was unsure whether it was allowed to move on. The storm had passed in the night, leaving the basin heavy with mist and the scent of wet earth. Pale light crept in from the east, revealing what darkness had concealed. Trampled reeds, deep ruts filled with water, and the gathered shapes of a herd that had come back but had not yet decided what to do next. They stood at a distance at first. The matriarch was easy to recognize, tall, scarred, her presence steady and undeniable. She rumbled low, not a command, not a question, but a statement of arrival. Several others answered her in soft layers of sound, their voices rolling across the basin like cautious reassurance. Noah heard them and lifted his head. He had not slept. His small body sagged with exhaustion, his legs stiff, his eyes rimmed with red. But when the sound of the herd reached him fully, something in his posture shifted. He pressed closer to Willow, then turned just enough to face the others, as if to show them what he had guarded all night. Willow lay where she had been stabilized, her injured leg wrapped and supported, her breathing shallow but steady. The wire had been removed carefully before dawn, a slow and delicate process that had taken more patience than strength. She had not tried to stand again. She had learned, sometime in the night, the limits of what her body would allow. Rosa stood with her arms crossed, watching the herd assess the scene. "They know," she said quietly. "They can see she can't travel." Maya nodded. "They'll decide together." That decision came without drama. The matriarch stepped forward, closing the distance by several careful yards. She stopped, studied Willow, then turned slightly and signaled. Two adult females moved in closer, their movements calm, deliberate. One took position near Willow's head. The other stood near Noah, offering her flank without forcing contact. Support, not rescue, not abandonment, something in between. Noah hesitated only a moment before leaning against the second female, his strength finally giving out. His legs buckled, and he sank into the mud with a soft, defeated sound. The female steadied him effortlessly, her presence a borrowed shelter. Ethan exhaled slowly, the tension he'd carried since dawn, the day before draining out of him all at once. He hadn't realized how tightly he'd been holding himself together until there was room to let go. "She'll need weeks," Rosa said, eyes still on Willow. "Maybe longer." "And the herd?" Ethan asked. Rosa's mouth tightened. "They won't wait that long." The words hung in the air, heavy and unavoidable. Maya stepped closer to Willow, careful not to crowd her. "They'll leave her support," she said. "Rotate care, but they'll move on soon. They have to." Everyone understood what that meant. Willow would not rejoin the full migration, not yet, and maybe not ever, in the same way. The herd would continue, drawn by water and grazing grounds that could not be postponed. What remained would be smaller, slower, vulnerable, safe enough for now. Noah stirred, lifting his head weakly as if sensing the shift. He looked from Willow to the distant line of elephants, then back again. For the first time since the clearing, he did not call. He stayed. The tourists who had first recorded him returned later that morning, guided at a safe distance. They watched in silence as rangers worked, as the herd reorganized itself, as a story they thought they understood grew more complicated. The woman lowered her phone again, tears finally spilling over. "I thought it was a tragedy," she whispered to her husband. "I didn't know it would end like this." Her husband squeezed her hand. "It hasn't ended," he said. "It's just changed." Ethan overheard them and felt the truth of it settle deep. This was the part no video caption could hold. Not loss, not victory. Something quieter, heavier. Later, there would be reports. There would be meetings about upgrading patrol routes, removing old snares, increasing funding. There would be appeals written in careful language, the same language used in brochures about retirement planning, Medicare coverage, and long-term care insurance, ways of preparing for futures shaped by risk, not certainty. Those things mattered. But none of them explained Noah. Noah, who had refused to accept absence as an answer. Noah, who had stood in an empty clearing and decided that leaving was the wrong kind of survival. Noah, whose insistence had drawn eyes, then hands, then an entire herd back to a place everyone else had written off. By midday, the herd began to move again. One by one, they turned west, their departure slow and deliberate. Several remained behind, forming a loose protective ring around Willow and Noah. When the last of the main group disappeared over the rise, the basin grew quiet once more. Willow lifted her head slightly and touched Noah with her trunk. Just a brief contact. Enough. Noah leaned into her, eyes closing at last. They thought the mother elephant was gone. They were wrong. She was still here, wounded, changed, unable to return to the life she'd had before. And because her baby had refused to accept loss as final, she had been given something else instead. Time. And sometimes, for those who survive, time is the most fragile, valuable thing of all. Before you go, take a moment and tell us what you felt. If you believe the baby elephant was right to stay, leave a 1 in the comments. If you think letting go would have been safer, leave a 0. No long explanations needed, just one number is enough. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you pause or feel something real, please consider subscribing to the channel. We share quiet, powerful stories like this, stories about love, loss, and the choices that change everything. Thank you for watching. We hope you'll stay with us for the next story.